We're on. So good morning to those of you who are watching on YouTube, and also to those of you who are in the audience this morning. This is the November 8th chapel service for Caron, Pennsylvania, and my name is Reverend Jack Abel, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you. And I have been working all week on what to say this week, but I modified my plans this morning on my way in, as I was moved to recall some personal stories. And I want to say in advance that I will try to anonymize these stories, and that I'm also deeply grateful to those people that I am remembering and bringing their experience and suffering to help us find strength and hope. The first person I want to talk about is a gentleman I met in 1989. I was beginning my sobriety, and I was scared, and I was absolutely convinced that I was not going to be able to stay sober, and I was broken and clinging to a little bit of time. I was attending meetings fervently every day. I was doing a 90 and 90, which would become a 360 and 365, and then for my first several years I was a passionate meeting attender. And early on, there was a young man, crazy redhead, like that classic real red hair and freckles and pale skin fellow. He looked just a tad bit older than me, but in my age range. His name was Kenny, and he had a chunk of time. I thought, like, wow, I think it was 7 months, and I was like, wow, that is like incredible, because I couldn't put together 17 minutes, you know. And so suddenly I had, I don't know, did I have 45 days, or it was a long time ago. I don't remember exactly when, but I know it was in the beginnings of my recovery because of the things that Kenny and I would do together. One of the things that happened was we were both told in that year not to go to ACOA. Some of you are exposed to ACOA while you're here. It's not as popular, but in the 1980s it was like a big thing in recovery to address childhood family of origin issues. And as newcomers, I was warned, don't go to ACA, it might like throw you off. And I took that in my defiant streak as, well, I'm going. So Kenny and I struck up a little bit of a friendship. I had a twisted admiration for him because I was a polysubstance garbage head who had done all kinds of drugs, and I knew I belonged in the club. But Kenny was a, like, kind of pure, classic, heroin-addicted fellow. And so I somehow, like, put him in a different bucket in my mind. Like, he was the true hopeless case, and I was, you know, I made him a worse addict in my mind than I was. And so yet, here he was, and he was staying clean and sober. He had 7 months, and he was my age, and these people who had 10 and 15 years, what could they possibly know about my suffering? But I was interested in Kenny's help, and so I remember one day we were talking after a meeting about being told not to go to ACOA, and we were like, I'm not listening to that, you know, like, I know better. And so we decided to go to ACOA together. We both went to this meeting. Sorry, I need to tell, it's a long story, Kenny and I. But anyway, we went to this meeting. It churned up my stomach. It made me want to go throw up in the bathroom. It was like so disturbing. We got in the car afterwards, and we went and had ice cream. So that's like feeding another addiction and sugar release. But anyway, and we both said, oh my God, that was so like, whoa, ooh, oh, it hurt, it was terrible. And I'm like, you want to go next week? And he's like, yeah, I'm in. So we started going to this ACOA meeting week after week after week, and eventually the disquietude that came on us from exploring these issues started to settle down, and we started realizing that we were people who were very broken even from our upbringings. And we started learning about things we had in common. So Kenny and I discovered that we both had sisters in Iowa, that we were both kind of estranged from our sisters, but the stories were quite different from there on. So, and our sisters were about an hour apart by car. So Kenny's sister had adopted his son away from Kenny and his significant other, because Kenny and the significant other were both hopelessly heroin addicted, and this sister of Kenny's was at least like employed and had her own children and was like had a house and a roof and all that sort of stuff. And she went to the courts in Iowa and seized custody of Kenny's son, Jacob, I'm going to call him, and of course that embittered Kenny and the mother to the sister, but it was probably, you would think, life-saving for the boy. So Kenny would tell me all about this, that he had a son, and he hadn't seen his son in 4 years, and that he had no legal rights, but maybe in the journey of the steps we could have some amends. And I was like, I haven't talked to my sister, I haven't visited her. And so we decided we did a pilgrimage, and we got in the car, we got in his car, and we drove from Delaware to Iowa, essentially in a marathon, like shared 8-hour driving shifts. And we got to his sister's, and I spent the night at his sister's, meeting her and the son and the sister's kids. And then I took the car and went on ahead to find my sister, and then I went back and picked up Kenny, and we went back home. So those hours in the car, it's a long drive from Delaware to Iowa, and those hours knit us together in a sort of a really powerful and beautiful way. So I tried to tape this to my face and it didn't work. But anyway, Marty's watching this out. So I apologize if you're having trouble hearing me, and I want to stay in the story. So Kenny and I get back to Delaware. It is still way before my first anniversary, so this was definitely 1989. I'm trying to do the math in my head for a second. In somewhere around 2001, 2002, I get a phone call from Kenny's sister, who had taken the boy into her custody, calling me, saying that she had hunted to find me, and asking me if I would facilitate Kenny's funeral service. He was found dead in a trailer, having been dead for 4 or 5 days with a needle in his arm. And I know people in the recovery community down in that area who volunteered to go in and try and sanitize the after-death scene. And when Kenny's sister and Kenny's son and Kenny's niece came out to Delaware from Iowa, and we had a memorial service, and those of us who knew Kenny in the recovery community turned out in a fairly large number. And I had become a pastor, which was sort of ironic, because I was an atheist, punk when I was driving to Iowa the first time. But I guess Kenny must have told her that I had become a pastor. Anyway, I was working with her to prepare for what we would do with the memorial service, and she said, "There's only one thing I want." And I said, "Well, tell me what it is." And she said, "I want to hear the song Desperado by the Eagles, do you know? Because in a dark and tragic way, Kenny's son had looked up at Kenny as the heroic bad boy. You know, the cowboy James Bond dirt bag, but somehow scruffy-faced, handsome, paradoxical hero. And that's one of the very first times I've ever used that song in a memorial service, but since then I've had many, many times. In fact, I remember being in this room with a mom whose daughter was here, and she said she wanted to sing, which generally patients do the singing, but this mom wanted to sing to her daughter. And I'm like, okay, and that's what she sang. She sang looking right straight into the eyes of her daughter and sang that song. What's my point if the theme is valor, as I warned the audience early before we turned the camera on? draw a distinction between recklessness and valorous courage, noble courage. Because I think we sometimes make that mistake. And besides that, I think it's an inaccurate coping strategy. What happens is that for those of us who are sitting in the room here, and I'll count myself among them, although I'm wearing a wristband, but it's not the same wristband you all wearing. But if you're fresh in addiction treatment, you probably have been wrestling with some degree of shame and regret about things that just happened. And in a backwards way of trying to make yourself feel better about it, you're like, well, I'm the gutsy, I'm at least an intrepid traveler, and I'll buy a whole bar and round of drinks or whatever. And we think of that as wow, that was gutsy, or I'll gamble my whole future away. There's a line in that song about come down from your fences. Living on the edge is one of the things that is valorized in the life of an addict, I think, unfortunately. And even if it's secret drinking or secret affairs or secret shopping and compromising the financial future of your family or whatever, there is this entertainment of danger and risk. When recently I was learning about brain chemistry and addiction, I thought one of the fascinating things was it's not just the upregulation of the pleasure, but it's addiction to the danger. There's an element of the brain's compulsive attachment to, because it's the danger release cycle. It's and then, we made it. That becomes this thing that is the trap of the addictive thing. And I used to wonder, how could I be addicted to cocaine? It's this makes me feel so awful, and I'm so paranoid, and everything. Do you have any more? But now I understand from the brain chemistry that it doesn't have to be purely pleasurable for me to manifest the addictive process. And so, not only is that a mistake, A, to use a lot of cocaine, but B, it's a mistake to then go back and try and spin the story as if I was at least being gutsy, and I was at least being true to myself and my nature, and I was, proving I'm a man, or whatever, sticking to the man, and and that is not valor. That's folly in the Shakespearean sense. It's tragedy when we retell the story of our hurts for ourselves and others as somehow the glorious deeds of our... This is the war story period of people in early recovery. Oh, I tripped to the Grateful Dead and Bedbox and did liquid LSD, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, good for you. So impressed, really. What I want to offer us today is a very different vision of recovery than one of either punishment or shame. And my story about what you are here to be invited to do is that it is a noble and courageous thing. That coming to treatment, which probably didn't feel valorous at the time, and staying in treatment. And then following a course of action recommended to you by other people who you didn't even know 3 weeks ago. To me, that is noble courage and valorous. And there are a couple more stories I wanted to throw in the mix here. So I remember very, very grimly a woman in my office when my office was over here on this side of campus who was telling me that she absolutely had to go home, a week early rather than stay for extended care. So she was going to stay 21 days instead of 28 days, much less 120 days. Thank you, Justin. And I got the phone call 6 months later from her suicide. So she was telling me the reason she had to go home was she had to go home for a birthday for her children. And I told her that if she didn't go home and she missed this birthday, she had a hope of having a near uncountable number of birthdays ahead in which her children would see a sober mom. She had already been in treatment multiple times. This is not hard to forecast. She was reenacting, repeating a treatment departure scenario. So it's not like I'm a fortune teller or anything, but I felt called upon to be honest with her and tell her the terror that she was inciting in my soul. And then I ended up having to call her husband and try to offer our condolences. And I remember he said to me, "She told me you tried. Thanks for trying." So if there are people on these units who are like, "Yeah, you go ahead and tell your counselor you need to leave early for a birthday," stop that. Let's not champion this foolhardy, reckless, misguided understanding about what's important. If you're here and you think you cannot go to sober living because you have to save your business, I would like to tell you the story of another patient who was here, a great, wonderful man who, thank God, in this story is still sober and has a great life. Married, I helped do the marriage, and his kids from his previous marriage are super happy. Everything's wonderful. But he was like, "I cannot go to sober living. No way. You don't know how important I am. I'm an attorney. I've got all these cases. I've got all this stuff I've got to do." And then something happened. Something happened to touch his heart and turn him from the valorization of his work life to the ideal of a sober life. And I remember talking with him about the financial cost of his not staying in the firm in which he was employed as a lawyer. So he lost his job as a lawyer in a particularly prominent firm because of the decision he made to put his recovery in front of that. And he lost a significant chunk of income in that current year. And 4 years later, he came back to speak to patients here when we were opening the Executive Grandview program. And I went to hear him because I helped with his marriage, and he's a good guy. We stayed somewhat connected. And so I heard him talk to the patients, and one of the patients said, "God, did you really give up like, a six-figure income like that year?" And he's like, "No, it was like several $100,000 income. I really did." And he said, "Did your career survive?" He said, "I make more money and I'm happier and people like me better today than I did in that period of time. And my children admire me." So this is the other piece of valor is what will be the legacy story? When you are found to be dead, will anybody have been able to be with you in COVID? Of course, sadly, many people are dying alone, not their own fault. Like sometimes it's just tragic. But Kenny's death, his aloneness, had to do with his inability to sustain recovery. He had burned every bridge. His addiction had betrayed every confidence. His addiction had caused him to steal from the people who were the last in line to try and be his friend. And the only thing that his sister, who had saved his son by taking the son from him, couldn't want at his funeral was to have the boy hear the tragedy of his son. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. I wanted to be finishing on a Viggo Mortensen Lord of the Rings passionate speech from the Peter Jackson movie, and not this day. So I didn't know that speech, but I end up staying quiet. And my plea to you is to beg of you to stop valorizing what was hell and find within yourselves the willingness to take the courageous move to get treatment and stay in care and pursue a life of recovery. Because if you put the schedule or the money or the drugs or the sex or the gambling or the shopping or the food or whatever it is in front, I pray for those who seek to love you and be in a relationship. Because they will probably be getting my phone. So be brave in the right way. That's which is what valor is all about. Valor is dignified courage, right? It's courage that sacrifices one's self-interest for the sake of others. It's something that we look at and go, gosh, I admire that person.